The other thing that researchers are looking at is like how much time in the natural world really is transformative, because what they do say is that extended periods of time really in natural spaces, especially disconnected from technology, helps reset, our senses, our ability to be present, and also, you know, dials up to creativity. And so a lot of us thought like spending like 30 days in the net, like really disconnected, is something that you needed to like reset, cleanse or whatever it might be. And what they're finding is that really those long-term effects of like immersive experiences in nature can be like achieved in 3 days.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Going Out Looking In, the podcast about the big questions of life, personal growth, and spirituality. My name is Maxi, I'm your host, and today we're exploring the world of ecotherapy. Yeah, two of my favorite subjects combined, therapy and nature. And that is with Dr. Megan Delaney. Megan is currently assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at Monmouth University in New Jersey. Her research explores the influence of the natural world on our mental health and the use of ecotherapy in clinical practice and the counselor education classroom. She's trained in outdoor leadership through the National Outdoor Leadership School and has spent several years as a wilderness instructor for organizations including the National Wildlife Federation and Outward Bound. I stumbled across Megan's work on Amazon, out of all places, while researching books on ecotherapy and forest bathing. And Nature is Nurture, Counseling and the Natural World stood out, which is one of Megan's books. And so I reached out, and here we are, having this conversation. I learned again so much about the healing power of nature and how can we bring classical healing modalities, talk therapy, psychotherapy, and all of that beautiful stuff. How can we bring that outdoors? And how can we basically co-create with nature and help individuals heal through that? All of that beautiful stuff is being explored in this episode with Dr. Megan Delaney. So, Megan, moving into this conversation, what do you feel like is the important context that myself and the audience need in order to understand what it is that you are doing personally and professionally in your life?
That's a kind of a broad question. I guess you can think about it in terms of personally, like how I got to where I am, and like I think where we are in, you know, our evolution as a species on the planet.
Mm.
So I guess I would say, if you look historically at us as like living creatures on this, diverse planet, we've gone through some pretty radical changes in the last 150 years. And I think some of those kind of radical changes, we haven't really kept up what I would say our connection to the natural world and how that then impacts basically our mental health. That's my interest, if that makes sense. How I got here was more of a journey. My parents were teachers or public education teachers here in the United States. And that kind of equates to not a huge amount of money. And then also we have a system where our summers are off. And so there were a few summers where my parents took us all over the United States, basically camping. And I don't know, there was something about like, as a child, you don't really even realize it. This is your experience. You go along with basically what your parents are doing. But as I got older, I realized that's like sparked a, you know, passion for travel, a passion for kind of experiencing more natural places, and also like my own internal conflict with being inside too much.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was in college and afterwards, I did some programs that trained me in terms of being like a wilderness instructor. I worked with a company I took a course in college with the National Outdoor Leadership School in Kenya, Africa for a semester, which kind of blew my mind in all kinds of ways. I was only 20 years old at the time. And when I came back to the States, I started working for some um, companies that did wilderness therapy, basically. And after college, lived across the states a little bit doing that. And what that did is kind of open my eyes to the transformational power of the natural world on like people. And so what I saw in those, moments were basically children that would come in with real traumatic life experiences being able to kind of recreate their sense of connection to the natural world and themselves, and be able to heal through that experience. I didn't really understand it at the time because I wasn't trained as a therapist. I just was literally witnessing the transformation. And yet, some people spend their entire lives living outside, but I ended up like coming back to the New Jersey, New York area, and working in corporate for a while. And I was in New York City on 9/11, and that was kind of a transformational experience for me, realizing that like how quickly life can change, and that I wasn't doing anything that I wanted to do, right? Like sitting in a
Mm.
cubicle in a corporate system was not fulfilling personally or professionally, and went back to school to get a um, master's in counseling. And when I was there, I met a professor, my professor, Gloria Pierce, who taught a class on ecopsychology. And a lot of the things started clicking for me.
Mm.
And basically, ecopsychology is this concept that I think is intuitive, and a lot of actual indigenous people, especially in the States, the indigenous cultures in the United States have a true, real connection to the natural world, um, especially, in their like practices and roots. Um, but like our industrialized lives really are disconnected in so many ways, um, from so many things in the natural world. Like so many people don't really know where their food comes from or where their water comes from, or if they were to need to create their own food, how to do that. We spend 96, I think, percent of our time inside now, on average. Not everybody, obviously. Some people have different life. But in the States, we are especially so many parts of the United States are, car-based systems now where we don't have walking. My town that I live in around, there's no sidewalks to walk on to get to, a town center where you can do your shopping or whatever. And so back in the 60s and 70s, some psychologists and ecologists and environmentalists started thinking about that, as academics do, and started combining or thinking about how that combines into, this concept of the like psychological impact of our connection to the natural world. And then how do we like extrapolate that into our own life experiences? So
Right.
how's that in the long answer to get here?
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it's just another potent example of
Sorry.
how life is, and yeah,
Right?
how we as individuals are moving through this experience and this incarnation, and where, if we allow it, the flow can take us. And look what you're doing now, and what a waste it would have been if you were just to sit in that cubicle. So you really, yeah, you took the leap of faith and you followed that curiosity. And that's also the question that I would like to get into a little bit, is like, what was the, can you describe that intrinsic motivation, where that was coming from for you to explore this new pathway professionally and personally after, being in that corporate world, that maybe, I don't know, was alive within you your whole life, or I don't know, was ignited then?
So a lot of the concepts that I learned about in that class resonated with me so much, because a lot of what eco psychologists talk about is a lot of the anxiety that we feel intrinsically or subconsciously about the effects that are happening through, you know, climate change to the natural world. And so what does that create but a sense of anxiety about like the sustainability of our planet, watching natural species and plants and animals literally disappear, losing habitats, even seeing your own place in space change physically. There's a term called solastalgia, where you actually feel nostalgic for your place as you watch it become developed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, the overconsumptionism of all the materialistic kind of consumer driven ways that our society generates income, um, even the waste that produces, the things that you have to throw out, all of that. Through my coursework, I was like, oh, that's why, like, there's a piece of me that feels not okay, right? Like there's this anxiety. It's almost like seeing the earth. And we love to do this where we you know and there's a fancy word for this, but how we create like human traits onto inanimate objects, right? Um, and call, especially the earth, we use feminine terms,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
watching her literally die, around us, if we're thinking about it, it's really stressful and overwhelming, and scary, right? And I think that is what really like hit home for me, that some of the like subconscious fear and anxiety I had, was explained through this concept. The other thing that I felt when learning about this was like, oh, this is why I feel so like connected when I'm in, for me, it's like forests, like when I'm in a forest or a place of a lot of trees, like it just feels um, safe and warm and connected for me. Like I love being in those places. Some people, especially I live on the East Coast, a lot of people that I work with here, like are connected to the ocean. And then also, do you feel like a sense of like connection to the little land that you're on, that you're living on, or around? And what does that do is create this kind of ecological identity where you feel like you want to care for that as much as it cares for you, right? And so in eco psychology, and then in the applied sense of that, as we do the work with clients as therapists, um, we teach a concept of reciprocity, which really we should teach just as a human being,
Yeah.
in general. And this is why I think it's so like, it makes so much sense to do this in a therapeutic sense, is we don't just take, right? We don't use the natural world. We have a reciprocal relationship with it, so that whatever we need, we also give back in whatever way we can. Honestly, that should be how we treat all our relationships, right? Like
Yeah.
if you think about relationship you have with another human. Like, is it reciprocal? I mean, there's going to be times, like, I have children, right? They drained me when they were little, right? That's just normal. There's times in relationships where people need you more, right? Like, they're grieving or they're sick, right? But and then in time, like, some of that cycles back to you and what you need. Um, and so like that should be a natural flow and process. And so a lot of things that I teach in my classes is that, like, how do we give back to the natural world? And so a big piece for me has been integrating, volunteer work that I do, um, for this place around me that I love. So in particular, I volunteer with we have a really incredible park system where I live, and give back some time, but also that fills me up, right? So like while I'm doing that work, I am outside. I made new friends. I get filled up, being in that place. But um, yeah, it's that I totally lost where you started, but that's what I like come back around to a lot is this like concept of like, are we then connected to our place in space, right? Do we feel grounded here? It's interesting in the States because we're such a melting pot of people from all different cultures. I think, except for indigenous people who also
Hmm.
like were like physically and violently transplanted from their own like place in space there's so much healing that has to be done around that and reconciliation. But for immigrant people, it's like you left your homeland to come here, and it might be multiple generations ago, but I know of people that have gone back to their like lineage, right, and have felt a connection to the land. I personally have Irish roots, right? So the first time I went to Ireland, I felt like really deeply connected to the land there, right? Indigenous people here in the United States say you think back, to your mother's mother's mother, right? And where she was born, and that's like your roots, And so you can literally, they say that you can carry a little piece of the land in a necklace or something. And like, if it's not where you're at now, it's where your roots are. I just love
Mm.
that concept. Um, so I do see like, you know, I really like to try to create a sense of connection to the land for my students in particular here so that they take care of it, right? So that's my long-winded answer to that question.
Yeah, so many beautiful bits and pieces in there.
Mhm.
Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
Mm, yeah, something that comes up, and I mean, like uh, yeah, probably can name it as a quarter life crisis that I'm just moving out
Mhm.
of somewhat.
It's
And
good. These are growth opportunities, Maxie.
yeah, it's just yeah, exactly. It's not what happens to us; it's what we make it mean. So I make it mean something, and these conversations certainly help to organize my sometimes wild streams of consciousness and compartmentalize them inside of
Yeah.
myself and find a place. But what I want to say with that is a little bit that I feel the weight of that heaviness, and of that burden that my generation and the ones after are carrying environmentally and spiritually and ancestrally as well. So being in Germany, there's a fair share of our burden that we are carrying. So I guess a question that I would like to ask you, having said that, is using your tools and ecotherapy as a modality, how can we as individuals, how can we facilitate that connection to our natural environment, and how can we, even though it might be very urban at times as well, so what
Mhm.
steps can we take in order to connect ourselves? Because I personally believe there's tremendous healing to be found, and that will basically translate into your actions. But first, I need to facilitate the connection. So, yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things that makes me think about is, and this is maybe the therapist in me, is like what I would ask a client is really to kind of talk about their earlier, connection to the natural world and what was that facilitated like, and to be really transparent that for a lot of people, the natural world or, natural spaces weren't safe. If you grew up in an urban environment that, didn't have safe green spaces, that sometimes natural spaces didn't feel safe for you, or were
Mm.
so, um, like you couldn't go out after dark because in the park there were drug dealers or, people that might hurt you. And so for not everybody, they didn't have the same experience, obviously, that I had, in which my parents took us camping and facilitated kind of a different, safe connection to nature. So it kind of depends on where your roots are coming from. For some people, like in the States, I've talked to people from African descendancy that talked about trees being very triggering, because of the lynching and things that happened in the United States. So it's like unpacking that first and really kind of helping think through, like, oh, where did my connection to the natural world come from? And where do I feel most safe? So then for some other people, it might be like their little corner of the world, it could be like a backyard that you might have or a park that you go to. It could be an animal, you know, maybe in an urban environment, you don't have as much natural spaces around you, but you have, an animal that you care for, or, whatever it might be, fish or a cat or a dog. That too is our connection to the natural world. There are things that you can do to bring nature inside. It's called like the biophilic effect. Like if you can bring pieces of nature into your home, into your office, that actually alone can make you feel a little bit better. The research shows that being outside in as little as 5 minutes produces like good effects for you, you know. Um, so even if you're feeling kind of stuck or bad, like going outside, as long as it's safe, like actually can make you feel better, breathing the air. And so doing it in small doses might be a way. Being aware of like where you feel good. Like, for me, again, it's like around trees. Like I feel good around trees. I love I love smelling like different smells of trees. There's actually science behind that too, right? Through this concept of Shinrin-yoku, which is studied extensively in like South Korea and Japan, where people do actual forest baths, where they go into the forest to bathe in the forest in a very like meditative, purposeful way to help, alleviate stress and bring in the good chemicals into your brain and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, I mean, I would say starting with identifying and thinking through your like even attachment history with the natural world and what that looks like, maybe unpacking things that you've been told by your family of origin about it, and then developing your own kind of identity around it and what that feels good for you. And then maybe trying a little something that you haven't tried before. Here in Monmouth County, we have this amazing park system that facilitates hikes, right? So if you're somebody who's never really taken a hike before, maybe you have a terrible sense of direction and going out into the woods by yourself, which I would not recommend for people that don't know how to do that, is could be dangerous. Go with a group of people that know what they're doing. One of the things I do in my class is I teach a class where we go canoeing for 3 days. And my students, all of them, like most of them, have never been like camping before, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a big leap for them, but they feel safe because we've created now before we go camping, we've created a group culture together of trust and mutual understanding, and like we talk a lot about what it's going to look like. We do a lot of planning, and then we go and experience it. And then the other side of it is, what kind of lessons have we taken from that? We pushed ourselves maybe outside of our comfort zone a little bit, but there were moments where we were really kind of, mindful about the beauty around us, the time we spent together. We made sure of that. Um, so it really kind of just depends on, where you are and what makes you feel good. You can bring in plants into your space that you can care for. You can try plants are funny. people are always saying, well, I kill plants. I mean, that's okay, right? This is what compost is for, right? It's like, you try to care for something. Sometimes you have to learn how to nurture it best. There's a lesson in that, right? Um, so bringing things into your home, venturing out a little bit, thinking about what makes you feel good, volunteering maybe with a beach cleanup or a park cleanup to meet people that also connect to the natural world are little steps that you can take. You can also go really far, right, and really kind of develop your connection to the natural world in different ways. They're studying this concept of awe, in that we find moments of awe. That's a very spiritual way of like connecting to experiences or places. And there's a lot of awe facilitated by nature, right? So, like going to watch a sunrise or a sunset can be something very awe producing, can make us feel big, like a part of something bigger, feel us, make us feel those feelings, right, that are associated with that spirituality, connection, grounding, you know, um, more of a sense of belonging, whatever it might be. The sunrise and sunsets are beautiful, right? Because it also gives like a beautiful and natural way of starting the day and ending the day. You also can feel that, sense of awe in like vistas or, when you're standing on a mountain or looking at a mountain range. And all those experiences of people crave that, but also like you don't have to go to a mountaintop to experience awe. You can experience awe by being mindful of your surroundings, taking a minute to notice, a flower growing out of the sidewalk or a bird that's sitting in the tree or you know whatever it might be, a beautiful plant, a snowflake, anything like that can facilitate kind of those experiences of awe. The other thing that researchers are looking at is like how much time in the natural world really is transformative, because what they do say is that extended periods of time really in natural spaces, especially disconnected from technology, helps reset, our senses, our ability to be present, and also you know, dials up to creativity. And so a lot of us thought like spending like 30 days in the net, like really disconnected, is something that you needed to like reset, cleanse or whatever it might be. And what they're finding is that really those long-term effects of like immersive experiences in nature can be like achieved in 3 days. So if you have a moment, read about it. There's this an author named Florence Williams that I love. She's a journalist, but she writes about. She does a really great job, kind of writing about the science in a way that non-scientists can read. She wrote a book called The Nature Fix and Why Nature Makes Us Happy, Healthier, and More Creative, and really kind of unpacks the neuroscience behind it in a way that we can digest. She also did an audiobook called The 3 Day Effect, in which she kind of explores the research behind, taking people out into natural spaces for 3 days can really help, reset that, intrinsic clock for creativity and for, being a little more present with ourselves. And also like, soaking in the healing power of the natural world. So it doesn't have to be, a whole month or whatever. You can do it in a weekend if you can make the time. So there's some really cool things that are happening. There's a lot of research about like our connection to the natural world and how it makes us feel. A lot of people are measuring that, like measuring those bathing and how it affects our blood pressure and our cortisol levels and all those types of things. What I'm doing is now like how do we translate that into actual therapy, right? So I'm a therapist. I teach their counseling counselors and a psychology program. So then how do we like kind of operationalize that? And so I have a private practice, and I have the privilege to be able to do it outside. Um, so pretty much all of my clients I see in natural spaces. I'm able to do that because I have a small private practice. If I was seeing 20, 30 clients a week, it might be harder whether,
Yeah.
not everybody has the ability to do it. But because my practice is small, and what I've found in that work, and a lot of it's walk and talk in a local park, is that my clients don't want to go back to an office. So I'll give you an
Mm.
example. This past Friday, it was raining here, and I actually have access to an office space on Fridays. And I said to my clients, like, "Do you want to go sit?" And they're like, "No." So like literally, we'll suit up, rain boots, and we'll walk in the rain. And they prefer it. So what that means to them is like it is an hour of their time a week where they know that they're immersed in nature. It's so cool because my clients get to know like the trail that we use, and we see here the different seasons. And so now with all the leaves down, we're like observing birds, and we're seeing more of the space laid out. And my clients are really observant of this now. There's so many metaphors in the natural world that relate to our life experiences that if you let kind of naturally happen, clients will come to. Um, I'll give you two examples. I
Mm-hmm.
was working with a psychiatric nurse whose life was, her job was demanding and difficult, and she was working with some of the most sick people, and it was really just nonstop for her. And we would go for walks. And she's funny because she would like take off, like you could tell clients have different paces, kind of depending on their, you're huffing and puffing, keeping up with her. And as we were walking quickly, we came upon this caterpillar. It's beautiful, orange, black, white caterpillar. She stopped and looked at it. Now, mind you, the caterpillar could have been sprinting. I don't know, but it looked in our mind
Mm-hmm.
like it was going really slow. It was kind of just cruising along. And she took a giant breath and said, "Oh, I need to slow down." Right? Like literally I could have said that to her a million times. Like, girl, you need to slow down. Like,
Yeah.
you know, she wasn't going to hear it. She had to hear it from herself, but it was facilitated through this interaction through nature that really kind of got her to a place where she's like, this thing is beautiful. And it's, it's reminding me that I too am that, and I need to slow down. Another example was, yeah, a friend of mine was working with a young boy who had had a lot of trauma in his life, and they were walking and saw a tree that had fallen over and that was starting to rot. Kind of like the cycle of life. I think the boy had experienced loss, and through that, of course, a new bud of a tree was growing, little baby tree. And the boy stopped and looked at the tree and said, "That's just like me." Right? So these incredible moments that can be facilitated through the metaphors of the natural world literally are everywhere, um, as opposed to, and there's nothing wrong with sitting in an office, right? So sometimes that's a safe place for people, but I just feel like that there's so much to see and experience. And yes, that can be distracting sometimes, but I'm okay with that. Like I personally think the distraction, excuse me, the distractions that happen in the natural world like are facilitated by nature, and like we should be mindful of that, right? That creates a moment where we're like connected and mindful about what's happening around us. The other thing that is really cool about the walk and talk in nature therapy is that I think it provides like a literal like movement, right? So we're literally moving through whatever we're working on. So rather than sitting in it, right, we're literally moving through it. And so I do have clients that talk a lot about trauma. My sessions with them, they cry. Sometimes we sit if they need to cry and sit, and that's okay. Sometimes they cry and walk. And what I find is that they can get kind of through that a little bit more and I'm not trying to rush anybody, but they can like literally work through that while they're moving. It also kind of
Mm.
stimulates the movement is a bilateral stimulation of your brain. And they're working on the science around that, but we're tapping into both the logical and the emotional side while we're moving, which kind of helps get those pathways moving so that if we have trauma stuck, in an emotional side, we can start thinking about it perhaps, and vice versa. So there's so much cool stuff to do in the natural world, in the therapeutic space. And the other thing that I'm starting to study now, and I'm not the only one doing this, but this is my new curiosity, is in our work as therapists. I mean, there's so many other people that experience this too, but there is a very high rate of burnout because there's so much. Like if you're going to do the work well, right? Like it's hard, right? Like if you really are going to help your clients work through their emotional pain, like it does take a toll, and there's a lot of burnout. What I'm seeing is that the people doing the work with ecotherapy, whatever that might be, walk and talk sessions, sitting by the beach, doing more adventure-based things. I have a friend who does paddleboarding with her clients, just super cool. Those I'm seeing this and I'm hearing from them, and I need to actually, connect this with like an empirical study that those people are like less burnt out. So the work that, because they're getting their buckets being refilled themselves by being in nature and having the time in the natural world and maybe moving, they're feeling better so that they could be better therapists. I personally, I see 6-7 clients a week. So I do 6 or 7 hours of walking in the woods. There are weeks when, I don't know, like around the holidays where my clients have other things going on, or, in the ebbs and flows of the work. I feel it. Like I am not like as motivated, as energetic, as connected, as grounded. I'm a little more cranky, on those days, all those weeks really where I'm not getting that 6 or 7 hours. Again, in our like kind of industrialized world, we're really, if you add it all up, we're only getting a few hours a week, not even like outside, if we don't make an effort to do it. So that's another little thing you can do is like think about like how much of my time am I actually spending outside, and then how can I maybe increase that by 20%? I don't know, and see how it makes you feel.
Yeah.
I know the winters in some places, the winters are tough. I actually think, because people say to me all the time here, like, oh, you take your clients out in the winter? And I'm like, yeah, because that's sometimes when we need it the most, when we're like,
Absolutely.
we need to rest. Don't get me wrong. I think that's important, but like, that's why we have seasonal affect disorder, right? Some of it has to do with the sun, I'm sure, but also like, are we actually making time to be outside?
Hey.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that.
Very brief reminder.
Was
If
so
you
much in
enjoyed
there.
this episode thus far,
And I was
you can do me an enormous
sort of like
favor and give
picking
me
up on
15
like
seconds of
several
your valuable
threads that
time.
were
Go to your
alive and
podcast
are
app
alive
right
within
now.
me about
And
like
if you
previous
enjoyed it,
conversations I had
give
on the
Going Out Looking
podcast
in a 5-star
with,
rating.
for example, Dr.
And while
Stefan
you're at
Harding.
it,
He's
hit that
like
follow
one of
button
the
and that
founding
bell
members of the
icon
Schumacher
to be
College in
notified
the
whenever a
UK,
new
and he
episode is being uploaded.
is basically
Thank you so much for your support.
disciple, if you
And
want to
let's
say
go
so,
straight
of
into
James
the episode.
Lovelock. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Was so much in there. And I was sort of like picking up on like several threads that were alive and are alive within me about like previous conversations I had on the podcast with, for example, Dr. Stefan Harding. He's like one of the founding members of the Schumacher College in the UK, and he is basically disciple, if you want to say so, of James Lovelock and the Gaia theory, and he introduced me to so much about the rhythms of nature and the analytical understanding of it. So he referenced Goethe many times, and how he would look at a plant and how he would really systematically analyze a stem and like look at a plant from the bottom up, and just like had a whole like spiritual cathartic moment by looking at a flower for like 2 or 3 hours. And that being said, I truly believe like what you shared, like there is going out and then there is going out. So basically, when I'm observing myself, and sometimes I'm using a walk to do some part of work outside. So basically, I take my phone and I reply to people via voice notes or something like that. So that's like, and then obviously the experience I have in nature is not the same. It's like I'm not as connected, like not at all actually. Sometimes I'm like, I don't even realize until I go out again that, I don't know, like a tree was chopped off around the corner where I usually always walk by or something like that. So something very obvious and like a big I miss because I'm staring on a device. And so I really truly believe that, yeah, there is like the intention behind doing anything matters. And especially when going outside, I found myself having a whole different kind of appreciation for what's actually going on if I'm truly present and if that is also my intention. So I feel, yeah.
That's true. You can do a grounding exercise, which I do. And I mean, this is just a trick that I teach my students. If you're feeling, ungrounded, we do a 5 senses grounding. And maybe you've done this or heard this before, where you're outside and you name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can smell or touch, and maybe 2 things you can touch, and 1 thing you can taste. Just so then maybe that will help. We call it the 5 senses grounding, but maybe that helps, in that moment to be like, okay, like I noticed the trees, I noticed the bird, I noticed the grass, I know whatever, and that just helps a little bit with connecting to wherever you are. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's so easy to get lost in our devices. I mean, we're so hyper conditioned to be productive constantly. That it doesn't feel natural to not be productive, or that your time is wasted, or you're not using it enough or wisely enough. When in fact, the opposite is sometimes true, where you actually need that time, right? To connect with yourself, to have moments of, mindfulness and rest or whatever.
Yeah, I
Sometimes
find,
it's hard to quiet our brains, right? Like our brains are going too fast.
yeah, absolutely. And like, I found there's a massive imbalance between my input of information versus the processing of that information. So basically, I'm constantly like over consuming. And in my case, it's just because by profession, like podcasts and things of that nature, like I'm taking in a lot. Like it's going to be constantly sort of like there's going to be high value information being delivered to my ears, and also audio books. So like the information in and of itself is really valuable, and I actually want to absorb it. But then if on the other side of that spectrum there is not enough time to actually integrate that wisdom and that knowledge, I can say I read 100 books or listened to 100 books, but I truly have not really read one properly. So yeah, I think there's like one saying of Naval Ravikant. What does he say? He says, you can read 100 books and basically don't know anything, and then or you can read the same book 100 times until you actually really get what's being said. And I feel like that is something with nature where it can really help me, or where it tremendously helps me to integrate and actually to facilitate boredom on purpose, and finding that boredom equals creativity. That really is true for me. I'm like, where did that come from now? Just like some thread of some sort of like wisdom lightning strike. I'm just like, okay, finally I cleaned the vessel enough so I can pick up on the frequencies that the universe is trying to I don't know, it's all out there, but
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's amazing. I think and that's the like trick now with even raising children, right? Like how do we I mean, how do we facilitate a balance between how much technology they're getting and how much creative play? There's a really cool organization called 1,000 Hours Outside. There's a couple of different organizations doing things that are, making aware. It's funny that it happens through technology, but that's just the way it is. I mean, um, you know, being really intentional, perhaps, of making time, of letting your kids, you know, have creative, non-electronic time in natural spaces so that their own creativity and flow and connection can be nurtured, right? So
mm,
it's hard. It's hard because not everybody, it's hard to have time to do it. It's hard when people have, two incomes or whatever it might be, or you're a single parent. But but I also think it's so critical for our children to facilitate that connection to the natural place or spaces so that they feel, also. I know that a lot of the generation of like your generation, Greta Thunberg and younger people, climate activists, there's a lot of indigenous climate activists that are saying, we've inherited this broken world, and I hear them like it's a lot of trauma that they have to actually maybe try to work through. Um, so yeah, all that's on our mind, right?
yeah, it is. And that being said, I wanted to ask you, so because from what I understood, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I've spoken to other people of like similar like modalities, and basically what they've been pointed out is that in the field of therapy in combination with nature, um, nature in and of itself is facilitating a lot of healing in itself. So a question that comes to mind for me then, as a bystander looking at your work, for example, and what you're describing, I'm like, okay, so how does then, like, what exactly is your role as a therapist within ecotherapy then, working with nature, and how also does it differ from, let's say, conventional psychotherapy in an office inside sitting down, okay, let's talk to me. So yeah, I would be curious to hear what you say
Yeah,
about that.
so it's a good question. So, my work, with some of the work that I do with my clients, or at least, and try to teach my students is, really having conversations around their connection to the natural world. Again, like where that came from, what was it like for them when they were a child, how do they feel when they're around it? What are the places that they feel safe with? In terms of being. And then while we're doing the work, right, in the natural world, whether that means walk and talk therapy or whatever, we facilitate those like conversations around mindfulness and slowing down and being observant, things that we can kind of do naturally in outdoor places. A lot of times we think about it as nature as the or the second therapist, like it's like my co-facilitator. And so, what do most clients come to you with? It's most of the time it's either anxiety or depression or relationship issues, right? So it's like, how do we heal those? A lot of times it's their relationship with their own self, right? Or having to work through childhood trauma or whatever that might be, and so what are the ways that we can, like heal ourselves through healthy connections, right? Healthy relationships, those relationships that nurture us. And so a lot of times that is the natural world. I mean, like obviously through water and food, we are nurtured like that way. And so being mindful of that, and then also being, really aware of the nurture that is provided in natural spaces. And then developing that concept of reciprocity, right? Like that we give back as much as we receive, but sometimes, and this happens with, I just happen to work with a lot of clients that give more than they receive, and some of that is creating like healthy boundaries around that. And so finding the connections that are healthy that way, so that we can, so like my work is kind of twofold. I want to heal the person, but I also want to help them develop like an ecological self, so that we feel like we can build this better understanding about the natural world in ways that we can partner and also heal it, right? Then that creates more of a hope, I guess, a sense of hope that the natural world has longevity, that we're not necessarily going to destroy it all. I want to make sure that we have people connected to their place in space, so that they feel the need to protect it. The animals, the plants, that sort of thing. Some of that, I think, is this the natural part of healing, right? If we're feeling connected and grounded and like a part of where we are, then we feel a sense of belonging and safety and connection. So not just with people, but with our planet. So how I think that, I suppose it can be done I haven't really done it in an office space. I know it can be done. I teach 2 classes about this, and I am a learner through doing, right? So like, um, I learn best when I'm actually physically doing it, right? So I teach my class all outside. So we have a whole semester of outdoor experiences where we're at different ecosystems, thinking about different things. And by the end of the semester, my hope is, that my students now have like a deeper understanding of their connection to the natural world and ways they can integrate it into the counseling space, Um, even having conversations around the climate stress and eco grief and things that we feel, and then also maybe even doing some of the work outside. One of the positive, is there anything positive from the pandemic? I don't know, but one of the positive things that I would say is that when I was talking about this work before pre-pandemic, there was so much like conversations about like, I don't know, logistics and um, like even like liability, of doing, counseling in natural spaces. What I think the pandemic helped kind of facilitate was this, one of the things that happened was that people couldn't go outside, right? And like that was really hard. Like all of a sudden we realized that we have access to, a lot of us have access to natural spaces, and we were told we couldn't go into it. I mean, it was like I can't even tell you how many people when the parks here shut down, people panicked, and there was a lot to be panicked over, right? But not being able to like go outside and breathe natural air it was suffocating, even more so than everything else. Not even more so, but as a part of everything else that was going on. But what happened is that within the therapy world, people started seeing clients not just virtually, but they started saying, okay, well, we can't come to an office because that's dangerous, but maybe we can go sit outside,
Right.
and all of a sudden, that made more sense. And so like the liability of it started to get a little less like worrisome for people. And now when I talk to insurance companies about, listen, I need liability insurance as a therapist, but I also see my clients outside. Whereas maybe 5, 6 years ago, that was like, nope. Now they're like, okay, that makes more sense. Now, as a therapist, you have to do a lot of, you can't just meet a client for the first time outside. Like there's things that you have to go through, and protocols that are important to make sure that that's the right space for your client, that they want and are able to do that. You talk about confidentiality, and that sometimes that can't always be guaranteed. And there's going to be times where we run into people. What is that? And then you talk through your client, like what, how do you want to introduce me? Like, what are things that, we'll stop talking in those moments, that sort of thing. I haven't really had an issue Some of my clients are funny. They're like, I don't care. I'll just say, this is my therapist, you know? Um, just kind of depends on the client. And other clients will, will be like, yeah, well, if I see somebody I know, I'll just say, this is my coworker, or something like that, So, so we just have those conversations up front. We talk about allergies and, things that are, important with people, bee allergies or that sort of thing. So you have to be careful, you have to make sure that you're taking clients that are appropriate. You have to keep track of your own safety, as a therapist too. So those are just things that are just important to talk about.
It's actually so like for me it's like super interesting because like honestly I would have never thought of those things, but now that you mentioned it, it makes perfect sense. And something that comes to mind is a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, and a beautiful soul. He owns the Healing Forest in Ireland. He has also been on the podcast. He's also a licensed like, ecotherapist. He does guided forest walks and forest bathing sessions and all that. And basically, what he said is that when he works with people who haven't been exposed to nature in a while, meaning they live in predominantly urban environments, being exposed, and in his case it's primary forest, it's untouched, it's not, there's nothing that is basically artificially sort of man-made, and therefore the birds, the animals in general, the vegetation, everything can be for those kind of people very overwhelming. So it can
Completely.
actually, it can, like it's frightening for them, like so depending on when they're entering the forest, so in the evening too quiet, they're not used for like a surrounding that is as quiet as the forest, or in the morning they are super scared of all the different sounds of the birds when they're like awakening and they're like singing and humming and whatnot. They're like, and for me as somebody who grew up in the countryside, it's like, yeah, completely, like I was oblivious to that, and I was just like, what can you,
Yeah.
is that a thing? But it is a thing. So
Yeah.
and that's like with you as a therapist taking a walk outside with people, that's within your responsibility as well. So I picked up on that, and yeah, I just wanted to highlight it because yeah, like I say, for me as like a neutral observer of something like that, or just like me talking about it, it's just like I
Yeah.
would have never thought that that's a thing.
It
So
was a lesson I had to learn, because, you've, as you become a therapist, you learn that like your worldview isn't the same as everybody else's. Well, shocker, right? Or like, you didn't have the same upbringing as everybody else. And that, you develop a sense of openness and empathy towards the fact that everybody's life experience is different. But that had to be taught. I just kind of assumed everybody loved the natural world. Well, what's not to love about it? But that was a real important lesson for me to learn that yeah, like not everybody feels comfortable, safe. It's overwhelmed. The senses might be overwhelming and all that sort of thing. So it's really important to have really kind of more conversations than you think. When I take my students canoeing, we talk about it. What is it going to look like? What is it going to feel like? What are we going to do when we get to camp? Um, and what are some of the things you're going to experience, just so that they're a little bit less anxious, and they can't prepare for everything, right? That's part of the value. But yeah, absolutely.
so I have another question, which is
Sure.
basically so when it comes to the actual like therapy modalities that you are using, so besides the geographic change of scenery, so basically you're outside, is there then particular exercises that on top of like talking to them and doing, I guess, like that's potentially maybe similar to like talk therapy that you could do in an office? Is there stuff that you exclusively do outdoors with them?
So, there's a lot of mindfulness exercises that I do that are nature based
Okay.
outside, where we might do a rooted exercise, where we stand amongst trees and then do a mindful exercise where we literally, visualize ourselves growing roots. So there's a lot of other things I do. I mean, I think the big piece for ecotherapy is integrating kind of that connection to the natural world as part of the modality and healing process. So acknowledging the climate stress, the eco grief, bringing that out into, and then, building tools for clients to have coping strategies that involved, the natural world. That being said, there is like, academics love, numbers and empirical evidence. And so I think that this modality is grappling like, how do we, empirically study this, right? I mean, we can study, the effects of stress. I mean, we can do like control trials where, people maybe see the same therapist inside and then, some people see inside, some people see outside, whatever, there's different ways that we can do it. But is there, and this is what I've talked to a lot of my, other ecotherapists about, should we be designing like a cognitive behavioral ecotherapy model that we can test, right? Maybe. That's for somebody smarter to figure out than me. Like that is the evolution of this world. I mean, of this work. I personally struggle with it because I think there's something so wild and natural about. I would hate to like, I don't know, distill ecotherapy into a like step-by-step process.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But that's how you actually like, if you do a step-by-step process, is kind of how you study whether or not it's effective. So I don't know. Maybe there is a model for that. I'm
Yeah,
sure
that's
somebody's working on it.
yeah.
It's
It's
just one
totally
of those
fine.
philosophical questions, right? Like for me, what's important about the ecotherapy is developing an ecological identity in my client, reconnecting them to their natural world, and they're feeling grounded in their place and space. Maybe healing any kind of, disconnection or trauma, helping them like recognize the tools in nature to facilitate healing, and then maybe developing practices of reciprocity in whatever ways that might work for them. You know what I mean? Could be as simple as the way they choose to eat or recycle, or maybe ultimately giving back to that. That to me is like how I like bring mostly a relational cultural lens to the work I do and incorporate kind of ecotherapy around that.
Mm,
But I think people do it differently.
yeah.
Maybe someday there'll be a model, like a DBT model around it. I don't know. Or an EMDR plus ecotherapy model, where we operationalize ecotherapy to be
No, like
continued.
yeah, for sure. I mean, when it comes to me personally, for me, nature, like in and of itself, is like more than enough.
Wild.
But
Yeah.
I know some people that and you were speaking to them as well, who might listen to this and who are more on the blue personality type, rational thinking, and so yeah, for them that might be useful. But something that
Yeah, it would be
I
useful. Yeah, I'd love to see some of those. I would love to see somebody explore that. I mean, I'd be curious about it. I'm more of a qualitative researcher. I'm like, I guess it's because I'm a therapist. I'm like, tell me about how that feels, I want to know your experience, another person would be like, well, let's see, let's see. I mean, they do, especially with forest bathing, like they do measure, levels of cortisol and, all that sort of thing to see the effects. But
Yeah, I find
anyway,
it always amusing also with meditation and yoga. I mean, 25, 30 years ago or something that would have been pretty niche and or still very niche and exotic. And now with neuroscience and just like the physical apparatus with which they can measure things
yeah,
in the
yeah,
brain and brain circuits and stuff, they now have evidence that it can write down on a piece of paper,
that's
and
right.
then therefore people trust it more. Whereas I believe like the experience in and of itself, like that's for me the evidence. So if I go outside and I feel better, even though I cannot put a name tag on it, I can
say I feel better, and that's for me, that's enough. But hey, everyone goes about
Everybody
it
has
in
a
a different.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Love it.
I wanted to ask you some that I stumbled
Hold on one
across.
second, Max. I'm just going to close my door.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Sorry. Noise in my house.
No worries. I did some homework and obviously did preparation for this podcast, and I stumbled across a journey that you took on when you were younger to Kenya. And I wanted to ask you about it and give you some space to voice what change and what learning you were able to distill from that experience.
Yeah, so it's crazy to think about, but that was over 30 years ago.
Right.
So I was a child. Um, it was one of the most transformative, eye-opening experiences I've ever had. Not only to experience a culture so different than my own, right? But also to see that so in that, I did a national outdoor leadership school program in Kenya. I don't think they do it anymore. I think they might be uh, they might be still in Africa, but in a different place. But you know, um, we spent a month on Mount Kenya hiking it from one hemisphere all the way to the top. So we started in the tropics basically, and ended up on a glacier, which is wild. We spent time in the Masai Mara, literally hiking in the Masai Mara. Some of us got lost there. That's a whole other experience. We spent time on the Indian Ocean. So, I mean, what was transformative for me was just being in an ecosystem that was so different than the one that I grew up with. Just seeing all this just incredible natural spaces, but also experiencing a totally different culture. And one of the things that really kind of, I reconciled, or at least thought about when I came home, was just how much abundance I was surrounded by here, in terms of clean water and, you know, um, access to whatever kind of food I want whenever I want it, and, air conditioning and running water. Because at the time, the time and space that I went to, um, in parts of Africa, that just wasn't what they had access to. But it also sparked my own sense of adventure and curiosity, and my desire to just get to know different types of climates and cultures and peoples. Um, so, I mean, at 20 years old, it was a really kind of, you really start to think about what actually makes you happy, or content, or is it, stuff? Um, yeah, that never was it for me. It was more about experiences and connections and people that I meet and their own stories, and, also natural places that are so incredible to be able to see. So that was really kind of what started kind of this journey on wanting to make sure that that was always part of what I was doing. So cool. It was a
Yeah,
really
thanks.
incredible experience. I feel so lucky to be able to, such a privilege to be able to go.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Certainly sounded like that also in other podcasts that I'll listen to where you shared that experience. I wanted to, so as we're slowly wrapping up, I wanted to ask you about your motivation. So basically, what is it why is this important to you? Why is this work important to you?
I One of the things I absolutely love doing is teaching the classes that I teach, because, and I love working with my clients too, but I love the being able to facilitate these kind of interactions with my students, and then being able to process it. with them, right? So we go paddleboarding, we go surfing, we go hiking, um, we write and think and kind of explore our own thoughts about it. We read. One of my favorite things to have them read is Robin Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, and they read other things about like the connections to nature, and we think about how indigenous cultures have different languages for how they connect to nature than for example, our English language. And what I have seen, my little place in space, right, is that since I've been teaching this, I've heard now of this little ecotherapy practice and that ecotherapy practice. And, my now 8 classes, are out and students are out in the world kind of spreading the message, in my little place in space. And again, I'm not the only one doing this, and nor will I ever be. But how cool is it, that this is rolling off the tongues of kind of my little area, right? My little kinesphere. That's what I love, and that keeps me going. I also get to teach outside. Like, what the, like I get to do these incredible things, and I get to really deeply get to know my students and my clients in kind of non-traditional ways, which, that to me ultimately fills me up, the connection that I have with not only the students and the clients in these spaces, but also the spaces, right? The connection that I feel, the the things I get to experience. It's great. It's really cool, right? Like,
Yeah,
I
it's a
wouldn't be
lot.
very good at sitting at that cubicle anymore. That just was not that was not my calling, it just was not going to fill my cup or make me want to get up in the morning. I mean, that's kind of hard enough anyway, right? I mean, like, there's just so much going on in the world to make you want to like shove the covers over your eyes that, you need to find something that, makes you feel a spark and connection and, excitement to do whatever it is that you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, last couple of questions I ask many of my guests, and I am very curious to hear what you say about them. So, I wanted to ask you, what are you proud of?
Um, well, I'm proud of my kids. They're awesome, you know. I have 2 girls and they're pretty amazing. But I am proud of I'm proud of the classes that I've created at the place I teach, and the work that my students are now doing. Like, that's really cool, and clients. So I get like texts and emails and things, like people just send me random pictures of like beautiful places or natural areas. Or I love when my client, will text me and be like, I went outside today, look at this, I mean, that just it just fills me up. I'm proud that they're doing that. I'm proud of all their work. I love when my students, and I'm proud when my students, will say, "Oh, I did this incredible thing with one of my clients today based on something I learned from your class." Um, I'm proud of like the work these young people are doing. Like, these. I went to a workshop here in the United States where there were a bunch of young Indigenous women from all different types of cultures that came and talked about their work on climate. Oh my God, like, how can you not feel proud of the work that they're doing? It's just amazing that there's young voices out there that are, um, you know, that are like advocating for the natural world, which doesn't have a voice
Yeah.
it gets things happen to it, right? It doesn't actually get, to express, what it needs or even to protect its own self in a lot of ways. So I'm proud of their work too.
What do we need more of in this world?
Um, Kindness and compassion. And I mean that towards yourself and others. I think everybody should take a course on how to listen. I mean, that's one of the things that we learn in it's so interesting. A lot of young counselors come to learn about becoming a therapist, and they all come in saying, I give good advice, and my first thing is like, we got to stop. Like, that's not what you do. Like, literally, you need to listen first and foremost, so that the healing actually comes from the individual and not from you telling them what to do, right? You might have best intentions, or even the idea of what will help, but like facilitating that through listening is, so if we can, yeah, so everybody needs more therapy and listening skills, so that we can get to a place of kindness and compassion.
Yep.
Good luck, right? Because that's a big, tall order, but I think it's possible.
Yeah. No, truly, like, and listening it's not waiting for the other party to finish to say what you wanted to say in the first place, but really to listen and to then address what the other party has shared. And honestly, like
Sometimes you
this,
simply, like
yeah,
paraphrase what they say or repeat it, so that they're like, did I hear, this is what I heard you say. Is that correct? That's
exactly.
true connection,
Verify, clarify. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, the podcast for me has been the best practicing ground for that. Like, I noticed such a massive difference in all of my personal connections. I'm just like, yeah, and but it's something you have to do it. You have to practice it. Like, it doesn't really fall from the trees, as we would say here in
Sometimes it's
Germany.
humbling. Yeah.
And what do we need less of?
Oh my God, crap. I mean, do we need stuff, like, oh, I just feel like there's so much stuff. Being really mindful of like what you actually need and what you want and why you want it, right? And do you really need it? And is it feeling something that you could feel through, like, something different, like a connection with a person? So there's so much, that there's so much, like, we could use of less visceral and, defensiveness and, thinking that your way is the right way, right? Without listening to another person. But yeah, I mean, I think environmentally, we probably could do with less.
Thank you.
Not
Truly
everybody, obviously.
appreciate.
Some people actually literally need more, but
Yeah,
you know what I mean? I guess that's easy for me to say from a privileged stance. There's some people that actually do need more, right? So if the people that like need less can shift that to the places where, people need, or places or animals or ecosystems need more, right? Then that could be like that would be really nice to see.
beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for your
Thank
time.
you.
Truly
That was a
appreciate.
pleasure.
Yeah, truly appreciate you and your work you're doing. And that being said, just giving you the space, like, to point people into the right direction. So if anyone is interested in what you're doing, like, where can we find you?
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for the time. I really love talking about this. I have a website. That's something that I need some help with. But it's megandelaneyphd.com. Yeah, so feel free to email me. I love hearing from people. And I have a lot of, resources that I can share if people want to learn more about what people are doing in this field, because it's really inspiring and interesting, and there's a lot of people doing some really good work. So
Beautiful.
happy to share those resources too.
Thank you.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, beautiful listener, you have made it all the way through. And I want to take a moment to say thank you. And you can do me an enormous favor. It's all I'm going to ever ask from you. And that is to go to your podcast app right now. And if you enjoyed the episode, give the podcast a 5-star rating. If you want to write 1-2 words or sentences, even more powerful, even better. Thank you, already in advance. And also, while you're at it, just click on that follow button, on that bell notification, so that you never miss a new episode. All of that just contributes, and it helps me to increase the reach of the podcast. That means I can attract bigger guests, and that means I can deliver more powerful episodes. So it's a tiny thing. I'm only gonna ask this little favor of you ever, not more. 10-15 seconds of your time, a couple of clicks, that's it. Makes a huge difference for me as a creator. So thank you so much.